To help eliminate ground loops and buzzing in a McIntosh C28 preamplifier, it's a really good idea to ground together all of the terminal strips that are riveted onto the chassis. These rivets go non-conductive. You won't be able to measure them on an ohm meter. They're probably going to still read, you know, your 0.1 ohms that your DVM is going to read out. You don't have the resolution on a DVM to really determine that these are extremely low resistance, if not absolutely shorted right to the chassis. So don't even try to measure them. Just run a lead from this rivet here, which is the negative on the bridge rectifier, to this rivet here, to this rivet here, and that will help a lot to tie the grounds together. If one rivet is slightly non-conductive and the other ones do conduct to the chassis, at least you'll now have a more solid ground. I've already started the process here. I typically take a bare 20 gauge copper wire and I put Teflon tubing on it, and as I run to each rivet connection, I place the tubing on, solder this connection, then I'll go and run a piece of tubing from here to here, so I have Teflon tubing between each terminal strip connection point. The next step is we want to make a connection between this rivet point right here, there's a rivet down there, over to our lead right there. And then the next step would be to run this lead over to this rivet right here. Now take note, this terminal right here is actually the rivet. It's hard to see it because there's wires in the way down in here. But this rivet is also tied together to this terminal right here. I have chosen to use this terminal because if I ever need to replace this cap right here, which is on this terminal, I want to have this terminal free to easily replace this cap. After I've established this connection, I put another piece of Teflon in right here and make the connection here. Then I chose another lead of wire to go from this all the way over to this rivet right here, and that completes rivet 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In addition to establishing a better ground plane by connecting all the rivet connections of the chassis, there's one more idea that I've been considering. I don't think it's necessarily necessary with this C28, but you might want to consider it with other C28s that are having a lot of ground loop problems, a lot of buzzing. You could drill a hole. Now this location right here is ideal for a hole. You would drill the hole, clear the paint around the diameter of the hole, put in a brass stud. Brass is very conductive and you can solder onto brass pretty well. So you could solder one of your leads onto that brass stud and establish a much better ground connection. Now I know a lot of people are not going to like the idea of drilling a hole in the chassis and putting in a stud because it's not original, it doesn't look good, but there are literally tens and tens of holes in this chassis. Seriously. If you need to get a better ground connection, just drill a hole. There are other ground issues with C28s. On these cables, there is a braided shield on the inside of this cable. And the way McIntosh connected the braided shield to the ground, this is actually the ground, is they connected a lead to the braided shield by way of a brass crimp. And that whole crimp connection is hidden by all these little heat shrink areas. So you're going to have to peel back the heat shrink and reconnect to the braided ground shield and get a better connection. You're probably going to have to solder it, or literally cut off the brass crimp and solder directly. It all depends on how bad it is. And there's another thought about C28s. Some C28s have such grounding problems that you need to consider grounding out all of the RCA jacks. And it is a lot of work to do all this, to reestablish all of these crimp connections to a better ground and ground out all the RCAs. That would be many, many hours of work.